I'm just going to give a little bit of context to the Roanoke Regional Food System Partnership. So the Roanoke Regional Food System Partnership was funded in October 2020 through a USDA grant. Again, I mentioned LEAP is the fiscal agent, but this is really a cross-sector collaboration. So here you can see the broad scope of partners, and there's many more than this that are part of the project. At the top is kind of the head leadership of the food system collaboration. And the goal really is to bring stakeholders together across diverse sectors of the food system to really begin to work toward creating a just and resilient food system in the Roanoke region. So Katie, you can go to the next slide. Actually, we might have skipped a slide. Can you go back? Yes. So how do we define the region of the Roanoke region? Well, there's 1.5 million ways to cut and paste a region, as we all know. But in the context of this partnership, we're defining it as all the contiguous counties surrounding Roanoke City, Salem City, and Roanoke County, including Craig, Botetourt, Bedford, Franklin, Floyd, and Montgomery. Next slide. Oh, yes. So when we came together as a partnership, we really wanted to have our guiding star, which is kind of our long-term vision of what we're working toward. And we came up with an equitable and resilient food and farm system that produces health and abundance in the Roanoke region. So we're really kind of keeping our eye on that broader vision of what we're working toward. Next slide. And then the way that we get to our guiding star is through our near star, which is to mobilize an expansive network to create a collaborative, action-oriented framework to prioritize food and farming systems in the region. And that's really what we've been doing over the past, I guess, 1.5 years that we've been meeting, although the work has been happening long before that, as different groups across the Roanoke region have been meeting over the past decade to really look at our regional food system. But over the past 1.5 years, what we've really been engaging with is going through an extensive systems mapping process. So for those of you that are involved in food systems, you really know the complexity of this work as it touches all parts of society, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the social, the environmental, the farming systems, the economic systems, and they're all interconnected and interrelated in ways that are incredibly complex. So as part of our food system partnership process, we kind of mapped the food system to really understand what are the factors that are enabling a just and resilient food system and what are the factors that are inhibiting it. And then at the same time, really went through an extensive literature review process. So as I mentioned, there's been tons of work done over the past decade looking at our food system. And we went through an extensive process of reading through all the food systems assessments that have already been done of the region, reading through some of the broader literature and really looking at what are the defined priorities in our region as it relates to the food system. And what we ended up coming up with was 4 goals to really guide the work of our network. And in that point, we kind of reorganized and restructured our network around these 4 goals. So each goal has two co-leads from different organizations that are chairing the working group centered around that goal. And then all the regional food system partners then kind of self-organized into the different working groups. And then each working group began to work toward creating an action plan. And then all the co-leads come together to kind of meet up as a leadership team to ensure that the work across the different working groups is being communicated and kind of cross-collaborated as necessary. So here we have one goal focused on healthy food access, one goal focused on regional food identity and marketing, one goal focused on food production, processing, and distribution, and then one goal that's really focused on the network itself and how we work together to build relationships rooted in trust, and ensuring communication across the network and ensuring that we're continuing to engage in a process of relationship building and really learning from each other. So from next slide. So I want to stress that this is an open network, so anybody is welcome to get involved with any of the specific working groups, or just join in the all partner calls, or just be part of our communications list. So if you're interested in getting involved, please email me and I'm happy to connect you in the ways that you're most interested. So from there, I'm going to pass it off to Kim Nawalny to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you all. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are located. I am Kim Nawalny, and I am the director of our Center for Food Systems and Community Transformation at Virginia Tech. And I just want to welcome you all today with this wonderful group of people. We get to work together on these really important regional food system planning efforts. I have the privilege today to recognize and celebrate our two speakers who are going to be sharing with us their perspectives and lessons around food policy councils, which we all know can be many things. And we're very interested in learning from the lived experiences on the ground and the wisdom that people share together. So in that spirit, I'm going to be doing a little introductions. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Jeannie Knight. Jeannie Knight, with a passion for the land, the arts, and the Deep South, Jeannie Knight brings creative and organizational energy to the intersection of agriculture, conservation, and community development. She has a BFA degree in scientific illustration, a master's degree in conservation biology. She started and operated a certified organic vegetable farm and managed several public and private sector teams developing stormwater and agricultural conservation practices. Since 2015, she has worked with the Center for Environmental Farming Systems on the Community Food Strategies Initiative, supporting a growing network of food councils across North Carolina. She's inspired by working collaboratively with passionate people for social justice and to help farmers make a viable living. So welcome, Jenny. Next, I have the privilege to introduce Jessie Rosenblum. Jessie is the project coordinator for the Western North Carolina Food Justice Planning Initiative. They bring with them over a decade of experience in food center education, project development, and project management. Their deep dive into food justice began in 2015 in Savannah, Georgia, building and leading programs to increase access to fresh food for children and their families. That work then sparked a desire to address root causes of food insecurity and led them to a macro scale food systems work. Jessie grew up in the Low Country, just outside of Savannah. They have a bachelor's degree in sociology from the College of Charleston and a master's degree in nutrition, completed while living and working in Barcelona, Spain. Most recently, they completed a professional training in somatic psychotherapy with the Hakomi Institute. Jessie is bilingual in Spanish and English and enjoys an opportunity they have to connect with the Latinx community. They currently reside in the mountains of Western North Carolina, homeland of the Eastern Band of Cherokee people. They are happiest in nature and on roller skates. Kudos to you. Wonderful. And just a real pleasure to have you both with us today. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And I believe, Ginny, you are going to be going first.
Thank you, Kim. That sounds correct. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. Appreciate you inviting us here today. It's wonderful to see your faces here and also to see a few North Carolina names, some that are currently in North Carolina and some who have transitioned up to Virginia. So I see you, Kina and Hannah, and glad that you're here today. I'm going to share my screen here. How is that, everyone? Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. So yeah, I am here to share a little bit with you about this North Carolina network of food councils. Appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be here for sure. And we have a lot of exciting work happening in North Carolina, and I have the privilege to have been connecting with a lot of people on the ground for the last many years. And as Kim said, we want to share the community wisdom, and I want to acknowledge that I am more of a backbone support and very involved in several different communities. And I'm thrilled that Jesse is here today for some more on-ground support from a local council, local initiative. So I am here from the Community Food Strategies team, which is a multi-organizational team. And my home organization is a Center for Environmental Farming Systems, as Kim shared. And my home is on the present day of Durham, North Carolina, the unceded territory and ancestral lands of the Occaneechi, Shakori, and Tuscarora people. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And I wanted to share for the Community Food Strategies Initiative. Let's go back here. And first, I want to start with our why we do what we do. And it's our initiative really exists to inspire connections and collective action so that community voices are heard and food policy shifts toward more equitable outcomes. And to us, that is important for us. We did a whole storytelling workshop series to figure out our exact why with a bunch of different community partners. And for us, it's really inspiring those questions, asking the right questions, and really amplifying collective action. So like many places and many other states, North Carolina, this network grew out of North Carolina really wanting to build a sustainable local food economy. And I know that you all in Roanoke Valley have several action plans, assessments, as Mo talked about. You're really looking at the assessments out there. And CEFS initiated a multi-year project back in 2008, 2009, and had about 1,000 people across the state engage in this assessment, which we called Farm to Fork, focused on building North Carolina's sustainable local food economy. And we came up with 11 game changer ideas out of that report and that series of conversations, focus groups, and issue area teams. And the first recommendation was around engaging decision makers in strategic food systems planning and implementation. And part of that recommendation was to build and establish a statewide food policy council and also support local food policy council development. And so for us, our mechanism for really pushing and encouraging community voice is food councils. And so the 11 game changer ideas that came out of this report were nearly all fully completed and funded. And so that's the beauty of having some of these larger scale assessments. And that's how community food strategies came into being. And so we started around 2012 with around like the initial implications of this, and actually got funded in 2014. But around 2012, we had about 4 food councils across the state. And that steadily rose with more support with our team. And then as of present, we have about 35 active food councils. And the last few years, it's been around 35 across the state. And I would say that, again, the support from our team has been really valuable in that. And then there's been a bit of a lull, but the number of counties that have been represented by food councils has steadily increased. And so even though we've had about 35 food councils for the last 4 years or so, we've increased the number of counties represented because of more regional food councils being created. And so currently we have about 60 food councils that have some participation in food councils across the state. And that's because of our regional food council focus. And so this map here, the dark blue areas are counties that have had food councils in existence for quite some time. And the light blue are more emerging councils, and the places that are crosshatched are places that are engaged in more regional council focus. And of course, like many places, there is some food councils that have waned or become inactive, but that's, as you all know, energy flows, leadership transitions, the resources aren't there anymore. Many different places, there have been some food councils that are inactive at the moment, but that's our current network. And so I'm going to be here today to share a little bit more of the overview of our network and how Community Food Strategies exists as a backbone kind of convener for these different councils, and share some examples of a few of regional councils, how they have come into being. And then Jesse will share more specifics around the Western region at the moment. So I was also encouraged to share some of our equity evolution for our network and for our team at Community Food Strategies. So I wanted to share some of that with you all, as it is incredibly important for us. And I think it's important for all of our community work in present day. So again, we talked about how we started around 2014, and a lot of that with as a statewide food issues forum. And we had 4 organizations that were part of our team at that time. And in 2016, we made an internal commitment with our team to make sure we had racial equity as a focus of our work, and really learning to figure out what that looks like internally and how we then process that and really iterate those actions outside across the network. So that was with some funding with W.K. Kellogg. And then in 2017, at our statewide gathering, we made more of a network commitment to racial equity practice. And between 2016 and 17, a lot of that commitment focused on including equity in everything we did. There's a lot of our conversations internally. It was part of our evaluations. It was part of our team culture and our own analysis and learning around how we think about community engagement, think about who's on our team, and recognizing that a lot of the local food movement at that time and a lot of local food councils were predominantly white-led. And so thinking about what it means and why Black and Brown people are not wanting to or not able to participate in some of these conversations, and really considering what that looks like and what we can do internally to reorient and see where the shifts that we have and what we can do. And so in 2018, we started focusing more on partnering with our Committee on Racial Equity group at the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. And we partner with them to have racial equity in the food systems training. And that's also the time when we started focusing on regional layer development. One of our guiding principles has always been around shared leadership. And we use a dynamic governance model called Circle Forward to really practice that. And so I think some of our ways in our team culture has always been about shared leadership and trying to uplift the voices of those most marginalized, and a lot with our facilitation practices and our outreach. And so that's been in existence for a while. But I would say in the last couple of years, we have shifted from an initial focus on direct technical assistance of food council development to more coaching and facilitating more peer-to-peer learning and collaboration. And some of that kind of shift in concept is from being direct facilitators in organizational development to really making sure those on the ground are the ones doing the work, investing in having the long-term relationships with community. And so we focused a lot in the last few years on supporting councils in their own racial equity evolution and development. And we have a couple of coaches for that. And also thinking about our own practices. We've given micro grants in the last several years. And since 2020, we've been using a model called shared gifting that I think many of you all know about, especially with your connection with the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, and which is more of a practice around participatory grant making and really shifting the power to the grantees versus the grantors, which has been a wonderful experience for us and really deepens the relationships across the network and helps our food councils understand the work that each other are doing, because they are funding each other. And so they have to really dive into understanding their work. And then I would say some of the ways in our equity work has looked, we've used several tools and are lucky to have partners of the core group. We have a tool called the phases of racial equity commitment, organizational phases. And we have used that tool, and I can put that in the chat in a little bit, to to see where you land. And we've noticed that as our team members change and the organizations change, our commitment to racial equity likely will also change, because we're only as far as along as the folks that are like furthest behind, correct? And so we have to work towards building us all up and continue to think about where we're at, given who's in the container. And so we've done that practice and assessed where we are in that evolution, where we are in that commitment every year for the past 4 years. And it's a shift, and it's not always linear by any means. It changes. Another practice that we've used, and again, I can share this in the chat, is we've used our mentors Dismantling Racism Works, DR Works, and they created a tool called Using Principles for Taking Action on Racial Equity. And there's 10 principles there. And we've incorporated how you can have specific actions for food councils under each of those recommendations. And we as a team also think about what we're doing under each of those principles, write them down, and assess them each year. And so how that kind of looks in action, we use one of our tools called the 3 expressions of racism, thinking about how white people are continually served and resourced versus people of color being underserved and exploited. And we think about those 3 expressions of personally, what we're doing individually, culturally, what are our norms, and then institutionally, what are those policies and practices that are doing each of those things. And personally, we have really focused on equity coaching for food councils and really having more interpersonal and deep conversations and coaching materials, which looks like book clubs, using films, using webinars to really spur conversation, and then also caucusing. We have a white caucus on our team and other spaces, and we also now have a BIPOC caucus to again help us deepen our own analysis and understanding, and to continually to work to improve and understand and how we can do better in this world. In the cultural space, well, first I'm going to say just the second bullet point about democratizing how we work. That's more institutional and how we work across our own policies and procedures. And I mentioned shared gifting as one of those practices that we've used to really shift what we're doing out in the world, not just giving grants and being the grantor and the gatekeeper, although in some ways that's happening because we're doing a lot of the grant writing, but really encouraging our food councils to engage with one another and be more participatory in the action. And then developing more of a relational culture is important for us. And that's building relationships across each other, doing small things like we have a tea for 3 once a quarter, which has been a really lovely practice for us. It seems simple, and it is, but it is really helpful to build trust and relationships. So when the hard conversations come up, we're available to do that with each other. So I want to share now some of the regional spaces. Let's see, there we go. I'm going to talk about 3 different regional food councils, a couple of the highlights that have been happening, and then pass it over to Jesse. So in the Piedmont Triad, you can see on the map here, it's more the central part of the state and borders Virginia. This is a 12-county region. This is a regional food council that's been around for a couple of years now. And prior to their existence, there was about 10 established food councils in the region. A couple municipal city-based food councils, 1 neighborhood-based food council, and then most of the other ones were county-based. So currently this food council is housed at our Council of Government, which covers that 12-county region. They worked to include strategies around establishing local food councils in their comprehensive economic development strategy. So that's how this initially got in. Many of you that are in economic development know that if there's something not written and stated in your SEDS, then it's likely not going to get funded. And so there's multiple groups that have stated food council development or agricultural development and connecting that to community development, workforce development, all of those things in their SEDS. And so that was there. We worked with them to get funded through USDA, as well as our Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation of North Carolina. They have a full-time food systems coordinator now. The COG provides incredible administrative and fiscal support. They have most representation from the 12 counties. They have co-chairs, like Mo was talking about, having co-chairs is a beautiful practice. And they really pushed to have a regional food assessment, which was done last year. And I would say one of the accomplishments that they've done, one, they have incredible participation and ongoing leadership within the council. And they did 12 to 15 different presentations last year from what they learned in their regional assessment, and mostly to Board of Commissioners. And so they're really putting a lot of emphasis on educating elected officials, which is really helpful. And it's hard to do when you have that economic development language. That's a plus for you. I'd say some of the challenges for this particular group, and I think one of the things that we'll see and that we've seen and experienced with working with councils of government is they have a lot of leverage in working with elected officials, but they don't have as much experience with on the ground community level engagement. And so there is a bit of a misalignment in some of our work of being community led and really having to put a lot of focus on establishing those community relationships. And so the COG is not necessarily known as being a strong partner in community and having that on the ground wisdom and connection. And so I would say that really operationalizing a racial equity practice is not a strong suit for the COG and having that community wisdom, but they bring a lot of other incredible assets to the work. For the Cartar region, which is also bordering Virginia here up in the Northeast, this group established a little bit differently. I'll also say before I move on to this, Piedmont Triad Regional Food Council, the COG itself worked with us for a number of years in connecting with food councils, and they partner with us on our regional gatherings for food councils before they went forward in establishing this food council. So they worked for a number of years before they went forward in doing this. So there was some intention around creating this, and we helped lead a multi-year process to create the structure for it. In Cartar, this is 5 mostly rural counties. It doesn't have a strong urban center like the Piedmont Triad. They had 1 established food council in the region, and really they came forward with a lot of strong leaders on the ground, thinking regionally, and those organizations initiated this and then worked with the COG to have them as some fiscal support. So with a couple different community groups and community leaders, they hosted 5 different community listening sessions around food, and out of the feedback they got from those listening sessions, they created a regional food strategy that was adopted by the COG. And they're going to, again, incorporate that in their SEDS, and looking forward to how they see that more and encouraging elected officials to use this regional food strategy. So they don't have an established food council at this moment, but they are really connected and bringing groups together. And I think their main impetus, these organizations, for having more of a regional vision is because they wanted stronger collaboration across the groups working in food. And they're doing that. And now the COG has a fellow that's supporting them in the work moving forward, but it is a little bit slower. The next one that I want to share is the Cape Fear Food Council. And this is just an example of, it's mostly 1 county, but in 2015, the region did a regional food assessment again and brought some of the counties together. So they have a document that's listing the assets and the opportunities there. And this is based around Wilmington, North Carolina, so an urban center, and they recognize the value of their rural partners, and wanted to encourage the other existing counties to engage in this food council. And so they intentionally established it more as a regional based one than just when they're single county. A challenge I think here is they don't necessarily have funding. They had a single dynamic leader that largely facilitated the momentum of this group. And as you all probably know and experience, that this is mostly volunteer work. And if for some reason these largely dynamic people get a full-time job and have energies taken elsewhere, they will focus their energy there on getting paid and doing other work. So there has been a lull in some of that work at the Cape Fear Food Council. And there's multiple organizations that are picking up the work and pushing it forward. Cooperative Extension, the Public Health Department, the university there, and other organizations, Feast Down East and others, are taking that, and there's more work moving forward. But they have done incredible disaster relief work, particularly from Hurricane Florence. And so the momentum and community involvement is huge down in Cape Fear for that food council. And so I'm positive they'll continue going on. So I think in short, to kind of share some of the benefits and challenge of the regional food councils, at least in North Carolina, and you'll hear more from Jesse. Benefits are really leveraging the resources that exist and leveraging the strong regional leaders. There's administrative capacity that they have, like the COGS and other groups. They're largely supporting some rural areas that don't have and can't sustain their own food council. And there's also a larger network and larger audiences. So there's more attention that you can push out this information to. Some of the challenges that we've seen is the on the ground community engagement. When you focus on one community in particular, one county, you can go deeper instead of more broad, right? There's less focus that we've seen, some on relational culture, so you have to be really intentional there. And sometimes there's less ability for legislative change and policy change and those things. So these are just quick focus areas that North Carolina food councils are doing. This is a survey that we did in 2020. So this is largely pandemic world, where food councils really focused on connection. They did a lot of community outreach, a lot around food access, and many of them had to shift what they were doing. So strategic planning was really important for them. They still focused on policy and a lot of supporting local farmers during this time, as well as a continued focus on racial equity. A couple of the other network impacts. Eric was mentioning wanting to see some of these specific ones. And some of these are around an equity focus, but we've seen food councils focus on more root cause. There is work around using present use value tax funds to support existing agricultural land. So when agricultural land comes out of and goes into development, there's a back tax. And using those back taxes to support the existing agricultural land so it stays in agriculture is a practice that has been used in a couple counties. And some councils recognize that this existing structure for using those funds to support agriculture was actually supporting predominantly white farmers. And so they brought in a Black and Brown farmer roundtable to really look at and dissect what that process was like. And so putting real questions in our existing procedures, which has been really helpful and eye-opening for a lot of those communities. Focusing a lot on neighborhood, mutual aid, thinking about living wage, and doing some other work. And then at the statewide level, there's also been a lot of great work that's been happening since the pandemic, and recognizing that the existing networks have really helped us being able to respond to COVID in a quick way. So we'll leave you with some of those. And one of the ones that I can talk more about them, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for Jesse. I wanted to share a little bit about how food councils have been collaborating and reaching a lot of collective action and change. And so instead of just working individually, we've been hosting collaborative food policy calls on a number of topics for the last few years, depending on what their interest is. And one of them is around food waste and recovery. And they've been meeting around this topic for a couple of years now, and recognizing that each county interprets some laws differently, and there's not a, there's some subjective interpretation in some of these laws around food waste, particularly in schools, and how you can handle some of those foods that are not being used. And in some counties, they use some of those foods that are still safe, still packaged, still at the right temperature, and share them with communities that need them. And other counties feel like all that food has to be thrown away, and there just wasn't consistent interpretation of those laws. And so several counties advocated in the last round of a North Carolina budget to get a $67,000 appropriation to go to NC State Food Safety Lab, create more standard operating procedures so that we can have more consistency across the state and can use that food in a more productive way to support people that need food and to not have food waste. And so they were successful. It took years to do it. They did a lot of research, and now they got more funding from the state budget. So there's a link here, and we can share that link. Again, there's a lot of things I'll share in the chat here, but I'm not as successful in doing that at the moment. About that story. So collective action and food councils working together feels incredible. And we're working towards working on the 2023 Farm Bill collectively at the moment. So to wrap up here, I want to give props to our community food strategies team. It's multiple organizations, 9 of us at the moment, and all of us have different focuses and expertise. In short of what we do, we really convene the network, whether that's statewide, regional, or by topics. We provide a lot of consultation and coaching, a lot of trainings and resource development around racial equity, organizational and food council development, policy and advocacy, facilitation, a number of those things. And then around capacity building, we offer a lot of micro grants, particularly through that participatory grant making process. We provide some interns. We have a number of paid advisor roles, and we're currently going through a process to have what we call regional network weavers, where we have more people on the ground in community that are connecting with councils and connecting statewide. And looking ahead, again, we're focused on relational culture. We're doing more shared gifting and sharing out that practice and working with other councils to use that practice. We're thinking more about solidarity economies. Again, a lot of this work starts from an economic lens, but we're expanding what we think about that and what does that mean and look like. How do we do it well? I think we all know that capitalism is oppressive and can be really hard for many people. And so how do we think about that in a different way? How do we explore new models? How do we work more collaboratively, and what cooperative models are out there that can support everyone? We have a commitment to majority BIPOC team, and that's happening now, and continuing to build up our BIPOC leadership across the network. And again, being more in a multiracial space across the network. And I'm just going to leave you with this as one of our word clouds from one of our shared gifting circles. We will often ask at the end of our meetings, what do you feel like leaving the call? And these are words that come up. And that's what we hope to continue to do in the future. So I'm going to stop there. I know we have questions later, and so we'll pass it on to Jessie.
Thanks, Jenny. And thank you for having me today, Katie and Mo and Kim. And we also have some people from the Food Justice Planning Initiative here. One of our coordinators, Shaniqua, one of our leadership team members, Laura. So hi, I saw y'all sign in. And yeah, I'm calling in from Black Mountain, North Carolina, unceded land of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. And I'm going to share my screen so I can tell you all a little bit about the Food Justice Planning Initiative. So let me just do that. All right. Okay, so WNC, for those of y'all who aren't familiar, is Western North Carolina. That's how we abbreviate it here. And we are the WNC Food Justice Planning Initiative, which also often referred to as the FJPI. We like our acronyms. And this was an initiative that was started to create a thriving, regenerative, resilient local food system with food justice for all here in North Carolina. And I just want to give you all more like concentrated information about this, because this could go on for many, many minutes and hours talking about all the different work that's been done here. But it was started in 2019 and born out of the CHIP process, so the Community Health Improvement Process in Buncombe County, which for those of you who don't know, in Western North Carolina, Buncombe County houses Asheville, which is our urban center in the West, and where lots of resources tend to get concentrated. So this process, from it emerged a need for a more regional, collaborative initiative to really bring in all of the far Western counties that often get neglected, the more rural areas. And so the WNC FJPI was born in late 2019, really started to build momentum in early 2020. And as we all know, March 2020, the pandemic started. And prior to the pandemic, folks were gathering. We had over 36 organizations coming together to really think through what were the priority areas for Western North Carolina. So we did have to shift online, which created some challenges, and there wasn't, as much participation in 2020 in the beginning, because a lot of organizations had to shift their focus to emergency food relief. And I'm just going to skip over some of this for the sake of time, and I will share our website after, and I can share these slides too that have links to some of this information as you click through. But as you can see here, people are meeting in person, and then we shift to our online format. And what came out of that CHIP process and then key informant interviews that were done across the region and community were these 6 priority strategy areas. So we have healthy and local food distribution, nutrition and cooking education, community gardens, collaborative agriculture networks, food waste reduction, and the Regional Food Council. So when we say strategy areas, this is, akin to working groups, much like what Mo was talking about with those goals and having leadership team within those areas. That is how we are organized too. So if you think about it as like a hub and spoke model, that's how we are organized currently. We have the Food Justice Planning Initiative as kind of the umbrella and the organizing body, and then we have these 6 different working groups that each have between 2 to 3 leadership team members, and they're all meeting monthly, and they each have a different priority focus as determined by those key informant interviews and the participation that we've had from community members and organizations as we've grown. And I kind of want to hone in on the Regional Food Council, since this is really, the focus of this call. And that group has been meeting regularly. We hired a coordinator, Joyce and Dea, who started with us in November. And I should say, prior to last June, there was no paid support staff. I was the first person to come on and start as a part-time contractor to help really build the capacity of this work. And in the last year, we've received enough funding to be able to then go on and hire support staff for each of these strategy areas. We do have some people that are focusing on 2, and then we have some strategy areas where there's only 1. The coordinator is just focusing on that one strategy area. So the Regional Food Council, when the Food Justice Planning Initiative was created, it was always meant to be a temporary house for this work. And the end goal is to become a Regional Food Council, but we're not quite there yet. And so when that does happen, the Food Justice Planning Initiative will dissolve, and all of the other strategy areas, so the other 5, will then fall under the Regional Food Council if those are still the priority areas at that time. We are currently in the process of doing a large assessment of the region. There's been little ones done here and there, but we really want to get a much deeper feel and pulse on what's happening currently and what's needed right now in likely 2023, when the Regional Food Council officially becomes a legal entity. And so that's where we are right now, is we're in discussion of what that legal entity looks like. There's been a lot of discussion and research, folks from all the different strategy areas participating in those to figure out what makes sense for us. And Jenny has been immensely helpful in sharing information with us and connecting us to folks in the Piedmont Triad and some of those other regions that she spoke on, to see the pros and cons and learn, from what other people have done. So we last month decided to move forward with a recommendation to file for 501c3 status. And that recommendation from the Regional Food Council went to our leadership team. Our leadership team approved that to then move forward to our large group meeting, which is when all of the folks across the Food Justice Planning Initiative, regardless if they're active in a strategy area or not, that's my alarm telling me it's time. But we've decided to bring that to our large group meeting in April. So we will vote on it there if folks are in agreement to move forward with pursuing that 501c3 status, knowing that that is the legal entity. It will be the container, not necessarily how we'll be organized within that container. We're looking at some different structures like co-ops and different things as how to share power and organize ourselves, because we are very interested in dismantling white supremacy within our organization as well, and share a lot of those values that Jenny spoke on. And that's the last thing I want to mention really, is that I feel like what's unique about how we've been doing things is it's all consensus-based voting. So everyone has a vote and they're equally measured. We do have leadership team that were voted on. So in some decision making, they are the representatives. But we will, like for this legal entity question, be bringing that to our large group and getting everybody's voice in there. And I think that's really important, even though it can make the work slightly slower. So I'll stop there. I could share a lot more, like I said, but I want to be mindful of time. And I know there are some questions, but I can put my email in the chat and our website, and I'm happy to connect further if there are more specific questions about any of the other work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse and Jenny. That was so wonderful. We're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. But before we do, Jesse, do you have an extra 10 minutes per chance? And if not, no worries, but just for...
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I just wanted to be mindful of y'all's time, but I'm happy to elaborate on anything.
Okay, great. We have a number of questions in the chat, but for anybody else that has questions, feel free to just keep adding your questions into the chat, and then I'll go ahead and kind of work down one by one. So to kick us off, we have a question from Laura Warren. Jenny, how do we know how PUV funds are used in counties? Which office manages that fund?
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to put, I just found this on our website too. We have an article we created a couple of years ago on these funds. Cabarrus County is the main one that had started this and using these funds for farmland preservation. And some of the impetus is they are in the greater Charlotte area, so they're getting encroached on by urban development. So that shares a little bit more about that practice, and they're establishing that fund. I don't know which office, it's a county office that does it. In Orange County, their grants program is done by their economic development office. but hopefully that link will share a little bit more information about the agriculture trust fund using PUV funds.
Great. Our next question comes from Paula Burdett. Could Jenny talk about particular outcomes for BIPOC that can be attributed to their work on equity? For example, Black and Brown Roundtable outcomes, BIPOC and Food Council leadership, etc. Can she share some of the written policies that have led to these outcomes? Thank you. Happy to read it again too.
Yeah, I found it here so I can read it as well. Thanks for that question, Paula. My first thought is I don't want to speak for some of those people in those areas, but I will say that in our work, we have more spaces where we have Black and Brown leadership and their voices and in making decisions about our work and how we move forward. I think an example in the shared gifting realm is a majority of funds. Again, these are food councils make decisions on how the funds are used. A majority of those funds in 2020 went to supporting BIPOC farmers and infrastructure. So that's a particular outcome that's supporting Black and Brown farmers. Written policies that we can share. There's nothing that's formal. Some of our stuff I would say is loose as compared to like we have things written down, but it's not going to look good for sure. But that's internal space. We can share some of those with you, Paula, of just like what we've done and how we think about our work and making sure that we're paying attention to those racial justice principles. So some of that's work might be specific to Paula, and if I can write down my email address and share some of those specifically to you.
Yeah, and with the same question, Jesse, I'm just wondering if you have anything to add within the Western North Carolina Food Justice Network.
Do you mind repeating the question again?
Sure, yeah. So particular outcomes for BIPOC people that can be attributed to their work on equity. And then can you share some of the written policies that have led to these outcomes? So just, I guess specifically outcomes from the work that are directly impacting BIPOC communities.
Yeah, so we are very new in actually being like boots on the ground out in lots of the communities. One thing that I'd be happy to share, and I can just talk about briefly right now, is we did develop a set of equity guidelines that all of our strategy areas and internally we are working and using that as kind of our metric stick of like, how are we doing? And so we just passed those in November. And as we're starting to do more outreach and seeing how those work in action, there will be some adjustments, but it's a great starting document. It's a dynamic document. It's one that's going to be evolving as we get feedback. And that's something we're already starting to do in our strategy area meetings and at leadership team meetings, is we want people to be really thinking about how to live out those values. So I wouldn't say we have an outcome from them yet. It's very much in process. And then I will say that, you know, we do have partners that are working in the Latinx community, or like Laura, who's on this call, that works with emerging mountain food systems that are empowering, that's out in the West. They've been doing a lot of work with Indigenous folks and been making an impact there. So yeah, I wouldn't say that we have specific outcomes quite yet. We're very much moving into that. We're still in our implementation phase. So all of this stuff is kind of being figured out and assessed in process as we go.
Maybe what we can do too is I'll connect with the both of you and just get like a big list of all the resources and information that you mentioned in your talks today. And then along with the recording and your slides, I can send out all the links so that everybody can access all of this, because I know personally I would love to have all these resources on hand as well. And I do recognize it's 11, so for any of you that have to hop off, thank you so much for coming, and we're gonna just continue for about 10 more minutes. And all of this is recording too, so if you have to hop off and your question hasn't been answered, we'll still ask it and then you can kind of find it in the recording. The next question comes from Leah Kalinsky-Jones. I'd be interested in learning how, if at all, North Carolina food councils are planning for food system adaptation due to climate change. I didn't see that on the priority list, so it may not be occurring, but it may also be a cross-cutting theme. So I wanted to be sure to ask in case that's the case. Thank you. And I invite both of you to answer. Well, we can start with Jenny.
Yeah, I personally want this to be more of a priority. And I think given a pandemic, I think a lot of food councils have focused on supporting farmers and food access work at this moment. But what we do see is our food justice, our youth justice initiative, and the youth around working in the food realm are very focused on climate justice. And that is where a lot of the energy is from our youth. We had a food youth catalyst this year that really supported that. And I think that, so in short, I would say it's not a huge focus for a lot of food councils, and the ways they are incorporating it in is through food waste initiatives. And there's a lot of that work going on out west. So Jesse, you might be able to speak more about food waste and recovery work out there.
Yeah, we have a food waste group, and they're connected to a group that works in Asheville, Buncombe. And they're starting to figure out like ways to start building relationships with a pilot program, maybe even something as simple as composting, and being the mechanism to collect that, because I think that's part of the challenge for them. But just as a more zoomed out look across our initiative, it's not explicitly a priority. Like, we don't have a group that's dedicated to that, but I do think it's woven in, especially with our collaborative ag group, and seeing what farmers need, and moving forward, what would create a more resilient regional food system for them to participate in. So there's that, and that also ties into our food distribution group that's interested in getting more local produce into the charitable food system. So it's all sort of overlapping, and it is something that we're aware of when we talk about, but it's not explicitly its separate group.
Our next question comes from Sam Hedges. Could you both speak about how you have approached equity in rural, predominantly white communities, if applicable?
Do you want to start, Jesse?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I mean, that is the landscape of a lot of Western North Carolina. And I think for us, when we're looking at predominantly white rural areas, we're focusing more on class and that intersection in the food system, and access to resources in that way. And so, yeah, and just offering, we're trying to get folks aware and skilled up. I just attended one of the trainings that Jenny's organization hosts about racial equity in the food system. Highly recommend. They have one coming up in April. But I think, that is part of what we would like to do too, is become a resource center for folks not only working in the food systems, but just in general, to have that racial equity lens in those predominantly white areas. But yeah, we're definitely working in a way that feels intersectional, and recognizing that there's still injustices to be addressed when we're looking at class, for example.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is there's similar work in our end, but I think that we're really recognizing and encouraging, like, there's so much opportunity for us to do racial equity work in all white groups. We need to do so much work as white people. And just because we don't have a person of color in the room does not mean we don't need to be doing this work. And so we're going into a lot of predominantly white food councils and really trying to encourage more conversation around it. And just, we need to be doing our own work. And it's not a diversity issue, it's a cultural issue. And so we need to do our work first to think about why we don't have other groups engaged. And so that's a lot of our focus now, is really trying to build out our racial equity coaching team, being a more multiracial team, and really enjoying this practice of like, what can we do as white people?
Thanks so much. Our next question comes from French Price. Regarding the shift from technical assistance to peer-to-peer mentoring, was that based on available resources or ROI/impact? Do you think the mentoring would have been as successful had you all not been building capacity of the network through technical assistance?
Simple answer is no. I don't think that we would have been as successful, but maybe it's a both and. I think that the technical assistance initially got a lot of people started, and it is still helpful for us to have that understanding of how these councils develop, and for us really engaging and working with and developing relationships with deep relationships with counties for multiple years. And then having them trust us and come to this network. They knew us well, they come to a bigger space, and we already have those relationships. So I think the peer-to-peer supported that. And I do think the technical assistance initially was helpful. And we've seen before in a couple of councils where we had a more of, I would say, a heavy hand in doing the direct facilitation and doing the leadership of those spaces. Once we left, some of that energy left, and that's not what we want. And so we shied away from that a lot. We don't want to build momentum without the community leading it and us providing a crutch in some way.
The next question is for Jesse. There's actually two questions from Kitty Wallace, and I don't remember what they're in context to. So if we need clarification, maybe Kitty's still on the call and can provide that. One of them is, where did the extra funding come from? I'm not sure, again, what that was in context to. And then how often does your large group meet?
Yeah, sure. I can just speak to the funding in general. And I'll answer the large group first because that's simple. We meet every quarter, so every 3 months or so, we'll all come together. And right now it's been virtual, but we're hoping pretty soon when the weather is nicer that we can meet outside in a way that feels safe. It'd be great to have some in-person time again. And then as far as the funding, we've had some regional support from a couple different foundations, which I'm happy to name if anyone's interested in those. It started out quite small with grants around like, $8,000, $10,000. And in the last year, we've received some larger funding from Dogwood Health Trust, for example, which is a legacy foundation that was created after the sale of Mission Hospital in Asheville and the surrounding area. So we've been building those relationships, and that's and WNC Bridge, which has been a big supporter of us, and really part of the reason we were able to create the position for myself, and then also these other coordinators that we've been able to hire, which has been really amazing. I mean, we've I don't know what the technical term is, but quintupled our capacity by hiring all these new folks who are really amazing, and they're bringing a lot of diverse experience to build out the capacity of this work.
Thanks, Jesse. We've got one more question from Jill. if the Western North Carolina has not established itself as a 501c3, oh, how are your funding and staff raising operations? All right, well, looks like we already answered that one.
Well, and I can just say, like I didn't mention, but we are fiscally agented right now. We are fiscally agented by a 501c3 organic grower school. Our missions are well aligned, and they've been excellent to work with. And we're just getting to the point where it makes more sense for us to be moving into 501c3 ourselves. So, and hopefully being able to provide that fiscal agency for smaller organizations as a way to start accessing and pulling down those funds that's not fully dependent on us solely.
I actually have one question to kind of finish us up today. So both of you kind of spoke to, well, and Jenny, you in particular were really talking about the different councils and the way that they're operating, and some of them being more rooted in the community and really bringing that community voice to the fore, versus maybe some really more oriented with the policy stakeholders, and but being a little less connected to the community. So I would love for both of you to just kind of speak to, I guess, tips, practices, approaches where you can really find that sweet balance where you have both. And that might be a hard question, but I'm just curious, as we're doing this work and really wanting to, affect big, policy, but also really ensure that everything we're doing is rooted in uplifting the voices of those that are most disproportionately affected.
I think it's a great question. And I think the Food Justice Initiative is really doing great work around that. And I would say that figuring out how you want to interact with community, particularly regarding equity, I think that some ways that we've found it super challenging being within the university system is it's hard to pay people. It's hard to provide some of the value that we think they hold. And even sending an honorarium out through the university is pretty oppressive. It's not helpful. So if you really want to engage community in a way that makes sense and values their work, so think about how you want to do it, and does the structure really support that in some ways. So that's just a structural piece of who the partners are, but finding we have a lot of workarounds, and being a multi-organizational initiative is really helpful because we will work with our nonprofits to pay people and not through the university, even though most of our funding is through that realm. And then it's just take time to show up and be in relationship always. What would you share, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. We do offer, we do compensate people for their time that they spend with us, and I think that's been huge. We've also built in supports for meetings, even though we haven't, used them. We're trying to be creative with online, but for childcare or reimbursing people for mileage, like really, even if someone's not showing up from an organization, valuing their expertise as their lived experience, and being a community member, I think that's really important. And we've been lucky and intentional in our funding request to be able to do that, and setting that money aside in our budget to be able to do that. And then the other thing I would say is, yeah, just what Jenny is saying, the showing up piece. I think now that we have more capacity, that in person, I know most of our coordinators are interested in getting out there, but even virtually, like going to people's meetings, learning about what they're doing, hosting events at somebody's farm, as a work day, those sort of things, helping facilitate that so it's not an extra burden on those folks, whether that's providing a meal or doing the kind of marketing around the event. Like there's a lot of different ways to just say, I'm here and I value your work, and I'm not just extracting information from you. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you both and being here with us today. Really, really grateful. I'm going to follow up with the recording, And then I'll connect with Jenny and Jesse to get all those resources compiled along with their slides. And just grateful for all of you being with us here today. And yeah, looking forward to moving this